June 5, 1942, Imperial Naval Headquarters, Tokyo. 0800 hours. Admiral Osami Nagano slammed the telegram onto the conference table. 4 carriers gone in 6 hours. Silence. 15 officers frozen. Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki stared at his hands like they'd betrayed him. Commander Kamito Kuroshima, architect of Pearl Harbor, looked ready to vomit. Captain Abe Toshio broke first. "Sir, we rescued 800 men. The pilots watched their ships burn." Nagano's voice dropped to a whisper, deadlier than shouting. "Do you know what 4 fleet carriers represent, Captain? 6 years of construction? 18 billion yen. The entire striking power of the Imperial Navy." He paused. "Gone before lunch." "We can rebuild," someone said weakly. "In 4 years, the Americans will be in Tokyo Bay in 2. Ugaki cleared his throat. "Sir, what are you proposing?" Nagano walked to the window. Below Tokyo Bay stretched gray and still. Somewhere behind those green curtains hung a half-finished hull. Hull number 110, the 3rd Yamato-class battleship, useless now. "We don't build another battleship," Nagano said quietly. "We convert it into a carrier." The room erupted. "Impossible. The structural stress alone. It's never been attempted at that scale. Can it be done?" Nagano cut through the noise. Ugaki's mouth opened, closed. "Theoretically, but she'd displace 70,000 tons, maybe more." "Perfect." Nagano turned. His eyes were fever bright. "Make her unsinkable. Armor her like a battleship. If we can't have numbers, we'll have invincibility." He leaned over the table. "Midway taught us carriers decide wars now, so we build the carrier that cannot die." Abe felt ice settle in his chest. He'd seen Akagi burn at Midway, seen steel twist and men scream. No ship was unsinkable. But around the table, desperate men grabbed desperate hope. And Abe said nothing. August 1942. Yokosuka Naval Arsenal. 0600 hours. Saburo Takeda drove the rivet home. 3 blows. The steel sank pure, clean, perfect. He moved to the next hole. "Old man, you're embarrassing us." Takeda glanced down from the scaffolding. Young Sato grinned up at him, holding a steel plate. "Then work faster." But Sato wasn't grinning anymore. He was staring at the plate. "This feels wrong." Takeda climbed down, took the plate, felt its weight, tapped it with his knuckle. The sound was off, too brittle, too thin. "Where's this from?" "Batch 447, recycled, from damaged ships." Takeda's hands tightened. He'd worked naval steel for 40 years. Good steel had weight-density life. This felt like tin. He found Foreman Matsui in the cramped office, didn't bother with pleasantries. "Batch 447 is substandard." Matsui didn't look up. "It passed inspection." "I don't care what the paper says. This steel will fail under stress." Now Matsui looked up. His eyes were hollow. "You know how many workers we've lost to the draft? How many supply ships the Americans sank last month?" He lit a cigarette with shaking hands. "We use what we have. We don't have the luxury of perfection. This isn't perfection. This is men drowning." "You think I don't know that?" Matsui's voice cracked. "My son is in the Solomons. Your son is on Zuikaku. Everyone here is building the ship for someone they love." He exhaled smoke. "Mark it for repair at Kure. That's an order." Takeda's jaw clenched. He walked back to the hull. Sato was waiting. "Well, we install it." They worked in silence. Takeda positioned the substandard plate in compartment C-47, a watertight section near the bow. Each rivet he drove with more force than necessary. As if anger could make weak steel strong. Before leaving that night, he pulled out his personal log, a habit from apprentice days. He kept a small sample of every batch of steel he worked with, good or bad. Tonight he cut a piece from batch 447, wrapped it in cloth, wrote in the log August 15, 1942, batch 447, recycled steel inadequate, foreman overruled, installed compartment C-47. This ship is being built on hope instead of engineering. Hope doesn't float. He sealed the sample and the log in a small wooden box, addressed it to his son Kenzo serving on the carrier Zuikaku. "If something happens to me, you'll know why." He didn't know the box would reach his son 3 years later after both the Shinano and Zuikaku had sunk. Didn't know marine archaeologists would find fragments of batch 447 steel in the Shinano's wreckage in 2002, exactly where his log said they'd be. October 8, 1944. Launch day. 1400 hours. No ceremony. No speeches. Gray sky. The scream of steel sliding down Krefisum greased ways. 71,000 tons hit Tokyo Bay. The wave rocked small boats in the harbor. Takeda stood at Gate 7. Watched 2 years of work become something separate from him. The largest carrier ever built. Also unfinished. He could see it unpainted sections. Gaps in the superstructure, missing gun mounts. She looked evacuated mid-construction. Beautiful, isn't she? Sato stood beside him, eyes wide, believing. Takeda wanted to say, she's not ready. We built her too fast. Cut too many corners. Someone will die because of what we didn't do. Instead, yes, beautiful. That night, cheap sake in a dockside bar. Sato asked the question, haunting them both. Think she'll survive the war? Takeda stared into his cup. Thought of his son on Zuikaku. Thought of batch 447 steel. Thought of all the red chalk marks, not ready, not ready, not ready. I think war doesn't care about size. November 25, 1944. Captain's quarters, Shinano, 0900 hours. Captain Abe Toshio stood in his new cabin and felt the ship breathe wrong. Ventilation off, air pressure inconsistent, water running in pipes that shouldn't have water yet, hammering somewhere below. 3 days before departure, Commander Nakamura appeared. Sir, damage control inventory complete. Abe's throat was already dry. And, we have 3 portable pumps for 70,000 tons, firefighting equipment for a destroyer. We're sailing with 200 to 500 souls. What does the chief engineer say? Takamatsu says the equipment at Kure transfers when we arrive. If we arrive. The words escaped. Nakamura glanced at the door, lowered his voice. Sir, permission to speak freely. Abe nodded. This ship isn't ready. Crew has 2 weeks training. Half the watertight compartments haven't been pressure tested. We're taking civilian workers who'll be welding during transit. At night, through submarine waters. Nakamura's hands shook. Request permission to recommend delay. Abe walked to the viewport. Destroyers assembling below. Hamikaze, Yukikaze, Isokaze. Good ships. But destroyers couldn't stop torpedoes if the target was too big to miss. Know what happened to the last captain who requested delay? Nakamura stiffened. No, sir. Patrol boat in the Kurils. Family lost housing. Son expelled from Naval Academy. Abe turned. His collar felt too tight. The Shinano isn't just a ship, Commander. She's a symbol. Proof Japan can still create greatness. Delay admits weakness. Weakness is contagious. With respect, weakness and caution aren't the same thing. The Admiralty doesn't see a difference. Silence. Outside, cranes lifted supplies. Below, workers welded through fatigue. Above, 300 cadets drilled in formations learned last week. Abe's hands were steady when he spoke, but his pulse hammered. We sail 1800 hours, November 28th, 20 knots. Coastal route to Key Sweeto, then inland sea. Shallow water by dawn. Submarines can't operate there. And if we encounter submarines before dawn, Abe met his eyes. Repeated the lie he'd been told, the lie he needed to believe. We trust the armor. She's built like a battleship. She can take damage and keep moving. Speed is defense. Hesitation is death. 20 years of drilling. 20 years of believing Japanese steel was tougher than reality. He almost believed it. After Nakamura left, Abe sat at his desk. Opened his personal log. His hand trembled just once before he wrote November 25th, 1944. Orders received. We sail in 3 days. The ship is not ready. The crew is not ready. But the war will not wait. We sail with hope instead of preparation. May it be enough. He closed the log, took 3 deep breaths, then went to inspect his command. November 28, 1944. Pier 6 Yokosuka, 1600 hours. Last workers filed off the gangway. Takeda stood at Pier's edge watching them go. Not selected. Too old. Too specialized. He didn't argue. 61 years of listening to steel. Right now the Shinano was screaming, not literally, but he felt it wrongness in her lines. Gaps in her hull, 1,000 compromises adding up to catastrophe. In his pocket, a letter for his son, written that morning. Kenzo, if you receive this, I was right to worry. The ship I helped build leaves harbor today. I do not believe she will return. I am sorry I could not make her stronger. Sorry I listened to men who cared more about deadlines than lives. The lesson never let urgency override conscience. A building can be rebuilt. A life cannot. Your father. Also in his pocket, the small wooden box containing the steel sample from batch 447 in his work log. He'd tried to mail it yesterday, but something stopped him, some instinct. Sato appeared. You coming to watch her leave? No. Come on, last chance to see your work. Takeda looked at Sato's face. So young. So certain steel and will could overcome physics. You watch for me. He pressed the wooden box into Sato's hands. Give this to my son if anything happens. Nothing's going to happen, old man. Then give it to him anyway. Tell him his father tried. Takeda walked away. Behind him, engines began to turn. Powerful, rhythmic, almost alive. It sounded like confidence. It sounded like the last breath before drowning. November 28, 1944. Bridge of the Shinano, 1800 hours. Lines away, all engines ahead standard. Helm course 180, Abe's voice calm. Officers moved with practiced efficiency. The ship trembled. Propellers bit water for the first time. On the pier, a handful of workers waved. No fanfare. No crowd. Just quiet departure into darkness. Ensign Yasuda stood near hangar deck access watching shoreline recede. 22 years old. Dreamed of carriers since childhood. Instead, empty hangar deck. Fuel drums. Ammunition crates. 300 terrified cadets. You scared Cadet Tanaka farm boy from Akita whispered it? No, Yasuda lied. I am. Tanaka's voice shook. My brother said submarines hunt these waters. Said they see in the dark. Yasuda almost said, we're too big to sink. The armor will protect us. But something stopped him. Maybe the way the ship vibrated wrong. Maybe the welding sounds 3 decks below. Maybe his father's last words. Question everything. Stay close to exits, Yasuda said quietly. Know where your life vest is. Tanaka stared. You think... I think we should be prepared. On the bridge, Abe received the final escort report. 6 destroyers in formation. Sonar clear. Weather rough but manageable. No enemy contacts. Increased to 20 knots. Nakamura glanced at it. Said nothing, but Abe felt the judgment. 300 miles south. USS Archerfish. 2200 hours. Commander Joseph Enright held the radar report. Hands steady now. 47 days at sea. 16 torpedoes fired. 1 kill a freighter barely worth the patrol log. But this was different. Con radar. Multiple contacts bearing 340 range 28,000. Count 6, maybe 7. Speed over 20 knots. 20 knots. Military. Sound general quarters. All ahead flank. Archerfish surged. Diesels screaming. Enright climbed to the conning tower. Pressed his eye to the periscope. Destroyer silhouettes. White wakes. And behind them, his executive officer breathed, Jesus Christ, how big is that? Enright didn't answer. He was back in 1943. Back off Palau. Target in his sights, a fat tanker, perfect angle, perfect setup. And he'd hesitated. Second-guessed the firing solution. Let the moment pass. Excessive caution, the report said. Cowardice, the whispers said. Relief of command. 18 months rebuilding trust. 18 months proving he wasn't afraid. Now the sea had given him this. A target so large it blotted out stars. He thought of his wife's letter. You don't care about medals. I care that you come home believing in yourself again. Plot intercept course, he said. His voice was iron. We're going hunting. Archerfish drove through heavy swells. Inside, 81 men breathed recycled air, prayed to whatever gods submariners believe in. Enright checked his watch, 2300 hours. Firing solution by 0300 if calculations held. 4 hours to close. 4 hours to answer the question haunting him since his relief. Am I a coward or am I careful? He'd been careful once. It cost him his command. Tonight he'd be decisive. The sea would judge. Aboard Shinano. Midnight. Abe walked the ship. Couldn't sleep. Climbed through darkened corridors. Work lights casting iron shadows. Workers welding. Sailors learning stations. Cadets trying to look brave. Each face looked to him for confidence. He gave it. The calm captain. The steady hand. But alone he remembered Midway. Watching carriers burn. Akagi's hull glowing red before she rolled. Nothing is unsinkable. Sir Ensign Yasuda at attention, nervous. Permission to ask a question. Granted. Is the ship ready? I've heard workers talking. What do you want me to tell you, Ensign? Harsher than intended. Yasuda flinched but held ground. The truth, sir. Abe studied him. 22. Parents praying. Believed the propaganda. Deserved better. His throat tightened. The truth is no ship is ever truly ready. Not for war. We make them as ready as we can. Then we sail, and pray engineering holds longer than enemy resolve. Pause. The Shinano is the strongest carrier ever built. If something goes wrong, we have protocols. Trust them. Yes, sir. Salute. Yasuda left. Abe stood alone, listening to the ship's heartbeat, engines thrumming, ventilation whispering, distant hammers on steel. Trust the protocols. But protocols couldn't seal unfinished compartments, couldn't strengthen substandard steel, couldn't make the unprepared ready. 3 decks below water seeped through a weld in compartment C-47. The weld Takeda installed August 1942 with batch 447 steel. A trickle. Few drops per minute. Nothing an alarm would catch. Not yet. USS Archerfish. 0300 hours, November 29th. Range? 1,400 yards. Bearing steady. Enright's hands were rock steady on the periscope. Through the lens, a cliff of steel. Port side visible. Moving 20 knots. So massive it seemed impossible anything man-made could be that size. His mouth was dry, heart calm. Solution ready. Ready, sir? Tubes 1 through 6 flooded. This was it. The shot he'd waited his career for. Redemption or failure. Decisive action or hesitation. His wife's voice in his head. Come home believing in yourself. Fire 1. The submarine shuddered. Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4, Fire 5, Fire 6. 6 torpedoes ejected, compressed air hissing, water flooding ballast tanks. Enright counted 90 seconds to impact at 46 knots. On Shinano's bridge, the lookout saw nothing. Sea dark? Moon down. Visibility 3 miles. Captain Abe reviewed tomorrow's schedule. Thinking about breakfast, inspections, a letter to his wife. Not thinking about torpedoes. Below Ensign Yasuda finally slept. Dreaming of rice fields, cherry blossoms. Home. Worker Tanaka Kenji finished welding. Joking about celebrations in Kure. Real food, real sake. Bathhouse. Sato held Takeda's wooden box. Still hadn't opened it. Wondering why the old man seemed so afraid. All these futures, all these small hopes, converged in Pacific darkness as 6 torpedoes ran true. Propellers leaving phosphorescent trails. Warheads carrying 643 pounds of torpex each. 3:17 a.m. First torpedo struck. Frame 143. Forward of the boiler room. Explosion punched through hull 16 feet below waterline. Detonated in fuel storage. Blast ripped through 3 decks. Vaporizing steel. Igniting oil. Pressure wave knocked men off feet 200 feet away. 4 more torpedoes struck in 40 seconds. Perfect ladder of destruction along port side. 6th missed. 4 was enough. Damage control center phones screaming. Reports flooding in. Flooding in A-44, A-47, A-50, B-43. Bulkheads supposed to hold. Pumps supposed to handle it. But bulkheads had red chalk marks not ready, and pumps had never been tested under load. Water poured through unsealed seams, through ventilation ducts, through cable passages workers forgot to seal. Abe received first report 3:19 a.m. Torpedoes, sir, port side, multiple hits, taking water. His order automatic, 20 years of drilling. Damage report, counter flooding stations, maintain speed. Maintain speed, because moving ships are harder to hit, because sonar detected no further contacts, because they were 70 miles from shallow water, but speed was death. At 20 knots, water pressure against damaged hull was enormous. Hundreds of tons per hour forcing through every crack, every gap, every unfinished seam. The Shinano wasn't leaking. She was being torn open from within by her own momentum, drowning in her own wake. In compartment A-47, Tanaka felt explosion as distant thud, then deck tilted, lights died. 5 seconds absolute darkness, absolute silence. Emergency lights flickered, dim red, color of blood. Then the sound. Roar like distant thunder, growing louder, echoing through steel corridors. Water. Out. Everyone out. Tanaka ran. Sato beside him. Stream of workers and sailors climbing through tilting passages. Behind them the roar grew. Someone screamed. Someone prayed. Loudspeakers crackled. All hands damage control stations. This is not a drill. It would be 17 hours before the full truth became clear. 17 hours of pumping and praying. 17 hours of closing doors that wouldn't seal. 17 hours of watching water rise inch by inch, degree by degree. 17 hours of believing steel could save them, that pride could keep them afloat, that the largest carrier ever built could not possibly sink on her maiden voyage. The Shinano was dying, but she would die slowly, with stubborn grace, taking with her the last illusions of an empire that confused size with strength, armor with wisdom, every soul aboard learning the same lesson: the sea respects no flags, honors no emperors, forgives no unfinished business. 300 miles south. Enright surfaced archerfish. Radioed the contact report. Large carrier, maybe battleship, possibly Yamato class. Multiple torpedo hits, target believed severely damaged. He didn't know he'd just killed the largest warship ever sunk by submarine. Wouldn't know for years. But standing on the conning tower, feeling cold Pacific wind, watching dawn break over empty ocean, he knew one thing. He wasn't a coward. He was careful. And tonight, careful had won. Nakamura burst into Abe's cabin without knocking. His face was white. 4 hits, sir. Port side, flooding in 6 compartments, maybe more. Abe was already moving. Uniform jacket half buttoned. Racing down the passageway. Behind them, the ship's alarm finally wailed 3 long blasts that meant one thing: prepare to abandon ship. Belay that alarm, Abe snapped into the nearest phone. Cancel abandon ship, all hands to damage control stations. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Takamatsu clung to a railing as the deck tilted 3 degrees. Water was already ankle deep. Not flooding from the torpedo hits, those compartments were sealed off. This was different. This was seepage, coming from everywhere at once. "Where's it coming from, huh?" he shouted over the roar of the turbines. A young machinist pointed at a bulkhead. "The seams, sir. The welds are opening." Takamatsu touched the steel, felt it vibrating under the strain of 20 knots. The torpedo damage had stressed the entire hull structure, and everywhere the welders had cut corners, everywhere substandard steel had been installed. Everywhere red chalk marks said "not ready," the ship was coming apart. "Reduce speed to 15 knots, he ordered. The response came back 5 minutes later. "Bridge says maintain 20 knots. Captain's orders." Takamatsu's hands tightened on the railing. He'd served under Abe for 6 months. Trusted him, but this maintaining speed while the hull fractured was suicide. He didn't argue. Orders were orders. At 3:47 a.m. in Damage Control Central, Lieutenant Nakamura studied the flooding reports with growing horror. The portable pumps were handling maybe 30% of the water coming in. The rest was spreading through ventilation shafts, cable runs, unsealed doorways. The ship's own design was killing her. "Sir, request permission to evacuate A-deck forward sections," his assistant said. "If we don't, we'll lose the men down there." Nakamura reached for the phone. Called the bridge. "Captain, we need to evacuate A-deck forward. The water's rising faster than we can pump." Abe's voice came back hard. "Negative. Keep pumping. If we evacuate, we admit we're sinking. Maintain damage control efforts." "Sir, with respect." "That's an order, Lieutenant." Nakamura hung up, looked at his assistant, saw his own fear reflected back. "You heard the captain," he said quietly. "Keep pumping." In compartment A47, Tanaka and Sato were trapped. They'd been welding when the torpedoes hit. Now water was waist-deep and rising. The watertight door above them was dogged shut, sealed from outside by someone following procedure. Standard protocol: isolate flooding compartments, even if men were still inside. Up here, Tanaka climbed the ladder to the door, pounded on it. "We're still in here, open up." No response, just the roar of water. Sato was hyperventilating. "We're going to drown. We're going to drown down here, and nobody knows." "Shut up." Tanaka kept pounding. His knuckles split, blood mixed with seawater. "Someone will hear. Someone has to hear." On the other side of that door, Seaman Yoshida heard. He stood with his hand on the locking wheel, frozen. "There's men inside," he said to his petty officer. "I know. We can't just... Orders are to seal all compartments forward of frame 140. We open that door, this entire section floods. 300 men die instead of 2. Yoshida's hand shook on the wheel. He was 19, 3 months out of basic training. They'd taught him to follow orders. They hadn't taught him how to live with the sound of drowning men. "Open the door," someone said behind them. They turned. Ensign Yasuda stood there, face pale but voice steady. "Sir, the orders." "I'm giving you a new order. Open it." The petty officer stepped forward. "Ensign, with respect, I answer to the damage control officer, not, and I answer to my conscience." Yasuda pushed past him, grabbed the wheel, started turning. The door cracked open. Water exploded through. Tanaka and Sato tumbled out in the surge, coughing, gasping. Behind them, the compartment was now completely flooded. The petty officer stared at Yasuda. "You just killed 300 men." "No," Yasuda said quietly. "I saved 2. He didn't know if he believed it. Didn't know if saving 2 while potentially dooming 300 was courage or selfishness. All he knew was he couldn't stand there and listen to men beg. At 4:15 a.m., the list reached 7 degrees. In the enlisted berthing area, 300 cadets clung to bunks that weren't bolted down properly. Boys who'd been in uniform for 6 weeks. Farm kids and factory workers' sons who'd volunteered because the posters made it look glorious. Cadet Tanaka, the one Yasuda had talked to earlier, gripped the bunk frame and tried not to cry. Around him, boys were praying. Some were silent. Some were writing letters they'd never send. "You think we're going to die," someone whispered. Nobody answered, because they all thought it. But saying it made it real. Tanaka remembered Yasuda's words, "Stay close to exits, know where your life vest is." He slid off the bunk, started moving toward the ladder. "Where are you going?" his bunkmate hissed. "To get my life vest." "We're not abandoning ship." "I'm not abandoning, I'm preparing." He climbed to the upper deck, found his vest in the locker, put it on, stood at the railing looking out at darkness and destroyers cutting white wakes around them. One of the destroyers, Hamikaze, was signaling with a lamp. Tanaka couldn't read Morse code, but he could read urgency. Short bursts, repeated, insistent. On Hamikaze's bridge, Commander Terauchi was losing patience. "Signal again," he told his radio man. "Recommend immediate reduction in speed. Recommend damage assessment. Recommend consideration of beaching in shallow water." The response came back. "Maintain formation. Maintain speed. Situation under control." Terauchi slammed his fist on the chart table. "Under control, she's listing 7 degrees and leaving an oil slick visible from 5 miles away." His executive officer spoke carefully. "Sir, perhaps the captain knows something we don't." "He knows pride?" Terauchi snapped. "He knows that admitting defeat means disgrace." He stared at the massive silhouette of the Shinano. "And pride is going to kill every man aboard." But he was a destroyer commander. Abe was a captain. The hierarchy was absolute. So Hamikaze maintained formation and said nothing more. At 5:33 a.m. in the bowels of the ship, the pumps in Section A44 failed. Overheated, burned out, the 3 portable pumps were never designed for this volume. They'd been running continuously for 2 hours. The electric motors seized. The water rose faster. In compartment C47, the compartment where Takeda had installed the substandard steel from batch 447, the pressure became too much. The rivets Takeda had driven with such anger trying to make weak steel strong began to pop. One, then another, then a cascade. The bulkhead fractured. Water exploded into the next compartment. Then the next. 3 decks below Sato felt the ship shudder. He was in the temporary berthing area for civilian workers still soaked from his near drowning. The wooden box Takeda had given him sat on his bunk. He'd finally opened it. Inside a piece of steel, a small logbook, and a letter. He read the log entry for August 15, 1942, read about batch 447, about warnings ignored, about hope not floating. His hands trembled. The old man knew. He knew all along. Around him other workers were gathering their tools, their belongings. The word was spreading the ship was dying. Orders or no orders, men were preparing to survive. "We should get to the upper deck," someone said. "We were told to stay at our stations." "Our stations are flooding." Sato stood, gripped the wooden box. If he died tonight, Takeda's son would never know the truth. Never know his father tried to warn them. He climbed toward the hangar deck. The tilt was worse now. Maybe 10 degrees? Walking uphill. At 6:12 a.m., Captain Abe finally ordered speed reduced to 12 knots. Too late. The damage was done. For 3 hours, the ship had been driving water through every crack, every seam, every unfinished joint. The list was now 12 degrees. Power was failing in forward sections. The massive carrier was nose down, settling. "Sir," Nakamura said carefully, "we should prepare to abandon ship." "We still have time," Abe said. "The sun's coming up. We can beach her. There's shallow water 40 miles ahead." "At 12 knots, that's 3 hours. We don't have 3 hours." Abe turned. His face was gray. "What are you suggesting, Commander?" "I'm suggesting we save as many lives as we can. By admitting defeat. By accepting reality." They stood in the tilting bridge. Around them, officers pretended not to hear. But every man in that room knew Nakamura was right. Abe walked to the viewport. Outside, dawn was breaking. Gray light revealed the full horror. The Shinano's bow was noticeably lower. The list was visible from miles away. The oil slick stretched behind them like a funeral shroud. He thought of the meeting in Tokyo. Nagano's voice, "Make her unsinkable." He thought of the Admiralty's expectations, the propaganda, the newsreels that would never be made. He thought of his wife's last letter, "Come home safe, that's all that matters." His throat was tight when he spoke. Prepare to abandon ship, but quietly. No panic. We do this with dignity. Nakamura nearly sagged with relief. Yes, sir? But before the order could be transmitted, the communications officer interrupted. Sir, message from Fleet Command. We're ordered to maintain radio silence to avoid revealing our position to enemy forces. Abe stared at him. What? They're ordering us not to transmit distress calls, not to break radio silence under any circumstances. The room went silent. Fleet Command, sitting safe in Tokyo, had just ordered 500 men to die quietly, to sink without calling for help, to drown rather than risk embarrassment. Abe's hands clenched. For the first time in 20 years, he considered disobeying a direct order. Sir, Nakamura's voice was soft. What do we do? At 7:04 a.m., Ensign Yasuda found Cadet Tanaka on the upper deck. The boy was crying, trying to hide it, failing. It's okay to be scared, Yasuda said. I keep thinking about my mother. She's alone. My father died 2 years ago. I'm all she has. Tanaka's voice broke. She's going to get a telegram. Died honorably in service of the Emperor. But I don't feel honorable. I just feel scared. Yasuda had no answer. He was just as scared, just as young, just trying to pretend he knew what he was doing. Listen to me, he said. When the order comes, and it will come, you get in the water. You swim away from the ship, far away. Because when she goes down, the suction will take you with her. You understand? Tanaka nodded. And you survive. You survive, and you go home to your mother. That's your duty now. Not to the Emperor, to her. It was treason to say it, but Yasuda didn't care anymore. At 8:23 a.m., the list reached 18 degrees. Walking was climbing. Men slid across decks. Equipment broke loose. In the hangar bay, an aircraft tug that wasn't properly secured rolled across the deck and crashed through the weakened side plating. The hole let in more water. In the engine room, Takamatsu made the call. Secure the boilers. Evacuate all personnel! Sir, if we shut down. If we don't, we're going to have a boiler explosion that'll kill everyone in this section. His voice was raw from shouting over the roar of failing machinery. Evacuate now! They climbed out of the engine spaces. 50 men covered in oil and sweat and seawater, some crying, some blank-faced with shock, all knowing they'd just sealed the ship's fate. At 9:15 a.m., Abe gave the order he'd been avoiding for 6 hours. All hands, prepare to abandon ship. The announcement echoed through steel corridors. Some men had been waiting for it. Some refused to believe it. Some were already in the water. Nakamura organized the evacuation. Senior officers to lifeboats, enlisted men to rafts, civilians to anything that floated. But there weren't enough boats. The Shinano had been equipped for a crew of 1 to 800. She was carrying 2 515. Get the wounded off first, Nakamura ordered. Then the youngest. Sir, regulations say senior personnel. I don't care what regulations say. The wounded and the young go first. Sato reached the upper deck carrying Takeda's wooden box. Around him, chaos. Men climbing over each other, life vests being torn from hands. Someone was praying loudly in a voice that didn't sound sane. He saw Yasuda organizing cadets into a line. Calm voice, steady hands. The young ensign had become the father these boys needed. Yushpi, Yasuda called to Sato. Can you swim? Yes? Then help me get these boys into the water. Most of them can't swim. Sato shoved the wooden box into his shirt, grabbed the nearest cadet, a skinny kid who looked 14. When you hit the water, kick away from the ship. Don't stop kicking. Understand? The kid nodded, eyes huge with terror. They jumped together. At 10:03 a.m., the Shinano's list reached 27 degrees. She was on her side now. Men walked on bulkheads, climbed through hatches that had become vertical shafts. In his cabin, Abe stood alone. His personal log lay open on the desk. He'd written one final entry, November 29, 1944. 1,000 hours. I have failed. Failed my crew, failed my ship, failed my nation. The Shinano is lost. I accept full responsibility. I will go down with her as honor demands. To those who survive, tell them we tried. Tell them the steel was not at fault. We were. We built too fast, believed too much, listened too little. May this be the last ship lost to pride. He closed the log, placed his cap carefully on the desk. Nakamura appeared in the doorway. Sir, the last boat is leaving? Then go. Sir. That's an order, Commander. You've served with distinction. Now save yourself. I can't leave you. You can. You must. Abe's voice softened. Someone needs to tell the truth about what happened here. And you're the only one I trust to tell it honestly. Nakamura's eyes filled. He came to attention, saluted. Abe returned it. "Go," he said quietly. "Live. Remember, teach." Nakamura left. Abe walked to the bridge. The ship was groaning now, steel screaming as it twisted. The sound was almost alive, almost human. He gripped the railing, looked out at the Pacific, at the destroyers standing off waiting, at the men in the water, small dots against vast gray. He thought, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." The Shinano rolled further. 30 degrees, 35. At 10:18 a.m., her bow touched the ocean floor 300 feet below. Her stern rose into the air. Men still clinging to the flight deck screamed as they fell. The massive propellers, still warm from hours of turning, emerged from the water, spun lazily in the air for a moment. Then the ship began her final plunge. Sato was 300 yards away, clinging to a piece of decking with 4 other men. They watched the carrier die. She went vertically, bow first, sliding into the deep like a sword returning to its sheath. The sound was immense, a roar of displaced water escaping air collapsing compartments. It went on, and then silence. Just wreckage floating, oil spreading. Men swimming or drowning or floating face down in life vests that hadn't saved them. 1,035 souls went down with the ship. 1,480 survived. Among the survivors, Nakamura, Yasuda, Tanaka, Sato. Among the lost, Captain Abe, Chief Engineer Takamatsu, 800 crew, 200 workers, 97 cadets. Sato reached inside his shirt, pulled out the wooden box, somehow still intact, still holding Takeda's steel sample and log. The old man had tried to warn them. Nobody had listened. In the water around him, men wept. Some prayed. Some just floated in shock, unable to process what had just happened. The destroyers moved in, began pulling survivors aboard. It would take 6 hours. Some men would die of hypothermia before rescue came. Some would simply give up, slip beneath the surface, let the sea take them. But those who lived would carry the story, would carry the truth, would remember that pride sinks faster than steel, that warnings ignored are wounds self-inflicted, that the greatest ships can fall not to enemy fire but to our own refusal to see what we don't want to believe. 17 hours. From torpedo strike to final plunge. 17 hours during which courage and cowardice, duty and survival, honor and horror all tangled together until you couldn't tell one from the other. 17 hours that proved the lesson every sailor learns, but no Navy wants to admit the sea judges not your intentions, but your preparations. And it judges without mercy. The destroyer Hamikaze pulled the last survivor from the water at 4:47 p.m. 19-year-old seaman Yoshida, the one who'd stood frozen at the watertight door, unable to decide whether to save 2 men or 300. He was hypothermic, delirious. Kept repeating, I heard them drowning." They wrapped him in blankets, forced hot tea down his throat, told him he was safe now, but Yoshida knew better. The drowning was just beginning. Commander Terauchi stood on Hamikaze's bridge watching the oil slick spread across 40 square miles of Pacific. Wreckage bobbed in the swells. Life vests, pieces of decking, a sailor's cap. The ocean had swallowed the largest carrier ever built and barely rippled. "Sir, message from Fleet Command." Terauchi took the paper, read it twice. Felt something cold settle in his chest. The message was 3 sentences, Shinano incident classified top secret. All personnel will maintain absolute silence. Violation punishable under military law. He looked at his radio man. "When did this come through?" 2 hours ago, sir, while we were still pulling men from the water." So Tokyo had known. Had watched them die for 2 hours before bothering to send rescue orders. And the first message wasn't about saving lives, it was about silencing witnesses. Terauchi walked to the survivor area. 147 men crowded into a space meant for 30, shivering, shell-shocked, some crying, some staring at nothing. He saw Commander Nakamura sitting against a bulkhead, still soaked, holding his head in his hands. "Commander!" Nakamura looked up. His eyes were hollow. "You're the senior surviving officer," Terauchi said quietly. "Fleet Command will want your report." "My report." Nakamura's voice was flat. "What should I say? That we sailed an unfinished ship, that we ignored every warning, that Captain Abe chose death over admitting we weren't ready." He laughed a broken sound. "Or should I write what they want to hear, that we fought bravely against overwhelming odds?" "I'm asking what you'll write." Nakamura stood. Water dripped from his uniform. "I'll write the truth, every word. Someone has to." He didn't know yet what truth would cost. At Yokosuka Naval, Arsenal Saburo Takeda was working late shift when the foreman found him. It was 11:30 p.m. November 29th. Takeda was riveting plates on a destroyer hull, trying not to think about the Shinano, about his son on Zuikaku, about all the ways steel could fail. Takeda, office now. The foreman's face told him everything. In the cramped office, a naval intelligence officer sat behind the desk, young, officious, eyes like flint. Saburo Takeda, master riveter, worked on Hull 110 from August 1942 to October 1944. Yes. You kept personal logs of your work, documented concerns about materials and construction. Takeda's heart hammered. Standard practice, quality control. Where are these logs now? I sent them to my son, for safekeeping. The officer's expression didn't change. Your son Kenzo, serving on carrier Zuikaku, which was sunk at Leyte Gulf 4 weeks ago. The world tilted. Takeda grabbed the desk. My son is alive, recovering in Manila. The officer paused. He'll remain alive if you cooperate. Takeda understood. Not a statement, a threat. What do you want? Hull 110 never existed. The ship you worked on was never built. You will not speak of it. You will not write of it. You will forget it. The officer leaned forward. Your son's life depends on your memory becoming very poor. Do you understand? Takeda's hands clenched. 40 years of integrity. 40 years of documenting truth. And now this boy in a uniform was asking him to erase it all. I understand, he whispered. Good. Sign here. A document. Dense legalese. But the core was simple violation of silence punishable by imprisonment. Family members subject to consequences. Takeda signed. His hand shook so badly the signature was barely legible. One more thing, the officer said. If your son had any documents from you, logs, letters, anything, they need to be destroyed. He's in Manila. I can't... We'll handle it. The officer smiled without warmth. For his safety. Takeda walked back to the hull, picked up his riveting hammer, stared at it for a long time. Then he drove a rivet so hard it cracked the plate. On December 3rd, Commander Nakamura was summoned to Naval Staff Headquarters in Tokyo. He'd spent 4 days writing his report, 12 pages, detailed, unflinching, every mistake documented, every warning ignored, every death accounted for. He handed it to Rear Admiral Kato, head of the investigative board. Kato read in silence. His face grew darker with each page. This is your official report. Yes, sir? It's unacceptable. Nakamura blinked. Sir, you blame command decisions, you blame construction quality, you blame scheduling pressure. Kato set the report down. What you don't mention is the heroism, the sacrifice, the bravery of the crew in impossible circumstances. With respect, sir, there was bravery, but there was also negligence. If we don't acknowledge, Commander, Kato's voice went cold. The Shinano's loss is a national humiliation, the largest carrier ever built, sunk on her maiden voyage. Do you understand what that does to morale, to the public's faith in our Navy? I understand it's painful, but hiding the truth isn't hiding, it's protecting. Kato opened a drawer, pulled out a different document. This is the report you're going to sign. It says the Shinano encountered an overwhelming submarine attack, multiple boats, dozens of torpedoes. The ship fought valiantly, but was overcome by superior numbers. Captain Abe died heroically. The crew performed their duties with distinction. Nakamura stared at the lie typed neatly on official stationery. I won't sign it. Then you'll face court-martial for dereliction of duty, failure to properly execute damage control procedures, contributing to the loss of a strategic asset. Kato leaned back. You'll be dishonorably discharged. Your family will lose their military housing. Your children will be barred from military academies. Your pension gone. You're asking me to lie about why 1-435 men died. I'm asking you to serve your country one more time. They stared at each other. Nakamura thought of his wife, his 3 children, his parents who depended on his income, thought of truth and honor and duty and survival. He picked up the pen. His hand hovered over the page. If I sign this, he said quietly, will you at least read my real report? Will someone in authority know what actually happened? Your report will be filed classified, meaning buried, meaning preserved, for history to judge when history is ready. Nakamura signed. He walked out of headquarters into cold December rain and vomited in an alley. That night he started drinking, would drink for the next 30 years. In Manila, Kenzo Takeda sat in a military hospital bed reading his father's wooden box for the 3rd time. The steel sample, the log entries, the warnings about batch 447. A naval officer appeared in the doorway. Not a doctor. Intelligence. Seaman Takeda. Kenzo quickly closed the box. I need to inspect your personal effects. Why? Security review, standard procedure for all Leyte Gulf survivors. Kenzo's grip tightened on the box. These are letters from my father, which makes them subject to review. The officer held out his hand. Not a request, a command. Kenzo thought about refusing. Thought about his father's careful documentation, 40 years of integrity preserved in wood and paper. Then he thought about what happened to people who refused intelligence officers. He handed over the box. The officer opened it, examined the steel sample, flipped through the log. His expression never changed. I'll return this once it's been reviewed. When? Soon. The officer walked out. Kenzo never saw the box again. Never saw proof his father had tried to save lives. Never had evidence that someone had spoken truth. Just an empty space where justice used to be. On December 10, 1944, Ensign Yasuda reported to his new assignment a patrol boat in the Kurils, the same punishment zone where captains who requested delays were sent. He'd been told his transfer was routine, but the timing told the truth. 1 week after the Shinano sank. 1 week after he'd disobeyed orders and opened a watertight door. The patrol boat commander, a bitter lieutenant who'd been stuck there for 18 months, said it plainly. What did you do to piss off command? Save 2 lives. Must have been important lives. Just workers, civilians. The lieutenant laughed. And you got sent here for that. You must have made someone look bad. Yasuda understood then. Not punishment for disobedience. Punishment for being a witness. For being someone who might talk. Someone who might tell civilian families their loved ones died in flooded compartments, while officers followed procedure. Better to put him somewhere cold and distant. Somewhere he'd learn to keep his mouth shut. He lasted 2 years in the Kurils. Froze. Starved. Watched men die of exposure and malnutrition. And learned what Nakamura had learned. The system protected itself, not the people who served it. Among the Shinano survivors scattered across Japan, silence became survival. Men who'd watched the ship die now pretended it never existed. Changed the subject when asked about their service. Drank to forget what they couldn't speak about. Sato, the young worker who'd nearly drowned in compartment A47, returned to his factory job in Yokohama. His supervisor asked where he'd been for 3 months. Naval project, classified. Must have been important. It was. Sato's hands shook as he picked up his tools. It really was. At night, he dreamed of water rising, of Takeda's face when he'd handed over the wooden box, of the old man's words, tell him his father tried. But there was no one to tell. The truth had been confiscated. On January 7, 1945, Cadet Tanaka, the farm boy who'd cried on deck, was reassigned to a cruiser. His mother had written asking why his first assignment was so short. He wrote back, training rotation, nothing to worry about. He couldn't write, my ship sank, the Navy's hiding it, we're forbidden from telling anyone, including our families, why our friends are dead. So he wrote about the weather, about the food, about anything that wasn't the truth, and his mother, reading between the lines, knew her son had learned to lie. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles east aboard USS Archerfish Commander Enright filed his patrol report. He'd sunk a large carrier, possibly Shinano class. Displacement approximately 70,000 tons. The report went up the chain of command. Came back with questions. Verify tonnage. No Japanese carrier of that size is known to exist. Enright resubmitted, added details. Radar plots. Testimony from 5 crew members who'd seen the target through the periscope. The report came back again. Classification uncertain. Credit for large fleet carrier tonnage unverified. Translation, we don't believe you. Enright's executive officer found him staring at the patrol report. Sir, does it matter what they call it? We sank her. We know we sank her. It matters, Enright said quietly, because if they don't believe the ship existed, then the men who died on it don't exist either. He was right. For the Navy's records, the Shinano became a ghost ship. Too embarrassing for Japan to admit. Too incredible for America to believe. Both sides agreed without ever speaking this never happened. By February 1945, the survivors had learned the rules. Don't gather in groups. Don't talk about November 29th. Don't ask questions. Don't remember out loud. But in quiet moments they remembered anyway. Nakamura, drunk in a Tokyo bar, would sketch the compartment layout on napkins. Draw flood paths. Calculate what could have been done differently. The bartender would collect the napkins after he left. Burn them. Sato would wake his wife with nightmares. She'd hold him while he whispered fragments. The old man knew. He tried to tell them. Nobody listened. Yoshida the sailor who'd frozen at the watertight door developed a stutter, could barely speak, but sometimes late at night he'd stand at his apartment window and recite names. The men he'd heard drowning. 163 names. Everyone memorized, because someone had to remember. In March 1945, Takeda received a letter from Manila. His son was alive, recovering, would be home soon. The letter mentioned nothing about a wooden box, nothing about confiscated documents, just pleasantries and reassurances. Takeda read between the lines, understood what had been taken. He walked to his workshop, found a piece of steel from 1940, the good steel before the war made everything cheap, carved into it with a grinding tool, Shinano, 1944, never forget. Hid it in the foundation of his house, his way of keeping truth alive. The war ended in August 1945. Japan surrendered. American occupation began. Military records were seized, catalogued, examined. And slowly the truth started emerging. In captured documents, American intelligence found references to Hull 110, to a massive carrier program, to construction records from Yokosuka, to survivor lists from an unnamed vessel lost November 29, 1944. They pieced it together. Cross-referenced submarine patrol reports, matched Enright's contact with Japanese lost records. The Shinano was real. Archerfish had killed her. In 1946, Enright received official confirmation, awarded a Navy Cross. His patrol report updated sank Japanese aircraft carrier Shinano 71,890 tons, largest warship ever sunk by submarine. He should have felt vindicated. Instead, he felt tired. Because now he knew the full story, knew the ship had been unfinished, knew she'd sailed with civilian workers still welding compartments, knew 435 men had died, not because his torpedoes were so deadly, but because the ship was already dying before he fired. His victory had been mercy-killing. In Japan, the silence began to crack. Survivors who'd been forbidden from speaking now found safe spaces. Support groups formed quietly. Men who'd lived through November 29th could finally say it out loud. Nakamura attended one such meeting in 1947. 15 survivors in a small room above a noodle shop. They didn't exchange names, just stories. I was in damage control. I was hangar deck. I was a welder, civilian. I was in the water for 6 hours. They spoke for 3 hours. No accusations, no blame. Just truth finally permitted to exist. At the end, the youngest, a former cadet, asked the question they'd all been afraid to voice. Why did they make us lie? Nakamura, sober for the first time in months, answered, because institutions survive by forgetting, people survive by remembering, and the Navy chose which one mattered more. In 1949, Takeda received a package. No return address. Inside his son's wooden box. The steel sample. The logs. Everything intelligence had confiscated 4 years earlier. No note. No explanation. Just the truth returned. He sat in his workshop and cried. That night he began writing. Everything he remembered. Every warning he'd issued. Every corner that had been cut. Every reason the Shinano died. He wrote for his son. For the men who'd drowned. For the future that deserved to know. And when he finished 300 pages later, he sealed it in a metal box and buried it in his garden. Someday, he told his son, when it's safe, when people are ready to listen, you'll dig this up, you'll tell them. Kenzo would wait 53 years, until 2002, until marine archaeologists discovered the Shinano's wreck, until the world was finally interested. Then he'd give them his father's manuscript. Give them the steel sample from batch 447. Give them proof that someone had tried to speak truth to power. And power had refused to listen. The Shinano's survivors carried their silence like a second uniform. Invisible. Heavy. Permanent. They learned to live split lives, the official story they told strangers, the real story they whispered to each other in dark rooms and quiet moments. They learned that truth isn't always allowed to exist. That sometimes survival means swallowing what you know and pretending ignorance. They learned that the greatest prison isn't built with walls and bars. It's built with threats and fear and the knowledge that speaking will cost you everything you have left. But they also learned that silence, however enforced, is never complete. That truth has a way of surviving. Of hiding in buried manuscripts and carved steel, and the memories of old men who refuse to forget. In the invisible prison built to silence them, whispers still escaped through the bars. Those whispers didn't end the war, they just survived it. When Emperor Hirohito's voice crackled over the radio on August 15, 1945, announcing surrender, Nakamura was drunk in a Yokohama bar. He didn't cheer like the others, didn't cry with relief, just ordered another drink and thought now they'll have to admit it. Now the truth can finally surface. He was wrong. The occupation authorities arrived in September, American officers with clipboards and translators cataloging Japanese military records. They found references to Hull 110, found construction logs, found a survivor list for an unnamed vessel lost November 1944. Lieutenant Commander Harold Jameson, Naval Intelligence, sat across from Nakamura in a borrowed office at Yokosuka. Between them, a file 3 inches thick. Commander Nakamura, you were executive officer on the Shinano. Yes. Tell me what happened. Nakamura looked at the file, at years of silence compressed into paper. His hands trembled. What does your file say? How? I want to hear it from you. So Nakamura talked, for 6 hours, told everything, the unfinished compartments, the substandard steel, the decision to sail at 20 knots, the 17 hours of drowning. Jameson took notes, asked clarifying questions, never interrupted. When Nakamura finished hoarse and exhausted, Jameson closed his notebook. This will be classified. Nakamura's throat constricted. What? The occupation government has decided certain information could destabilize the transition. Japan's already fragile. Revealing that your Navy sent 2,500 men to sea in an unfinished ship, then covered it up. Jameson shook his head. It could trigger riots, undermine faith in the new government. So you're going to bury it too. We're going to preserve it, for eventual release, when the time is right. Nakamura stood. His chair fell backward. There is no right time. The right time was 1944, when we could have stopped it. The right time was 1945, when we could have learned from it. Now you're talking about someday. His voice broke. Those men deserve better than someday. I agree. Jameson's face was tired. But I don't make policy, I just follow it. Nakamura walked out, stood in the Yokosuka yard, where the Shinano had been built. The dry dock was empty now, no more warships, just silence and rust. He thought they're all the same. Japanese command, American occupation, different flags, same instinct. Protect the institution, bury the bodies, call it stability. That night he went home and told his wife he was done. Done with what? She asked. Fighting, trying to make them listen. He stared at his hands. I thought truth mattered. I was wrong. Power matters, and power protects itself. She held him while he cried for the first time since the ship went down. In 1947, Ensign Yasuda returned from the Kurils, 29 years old. Looked 50. Frostbite had taken 3 toes. Malnutrition had rotted his teeth. But worse than the physical damage was the thing behind his eyes, empty space, where hope used to live. His parents threw a welcome home dinner. Neighbors came, asked about his service. I served in patrol boats, he said. Nothing exciting. They wanted war stories, heroism, something to make the suffering meaningful. He gave them silence. After everyone left, his father asked, what really happened to you? Yasuda looked at the man who'd raised him to believe in honor and duty and truth. I saved 2 men and got punished for it. I watched a ship sink that should never have sailed, and then I spent 2 years learning that the system doesn't forgive people who care more about lives than orders. His father frowned. That's not how our Navy works. That's exactly how it works. Yasuda moved out the next week, found work at a fishery, never wore his uniform again, never attended veterans gatherings, never spoke about the war except to say, I survived. But survival wasn't living. It was just not dying. The first survivor to break silence publicly was Sato. In 1952, 7 years after the war ended, he gave an interview to a small labor newspaper. Talked about working conditions on military projects. Mentioned the Shinano in passing, how workers had been forced to use substandard materials, how warnings were ignored, how civilian deaths were covered up. The newspaper printed it. 300 copies. Local circulation only. 2 days later, 3 men came to his apartment. No uniforms, no badges, just men in suits with cold eyes. You signed a secrecy agreement in 1945. The war's over. The agreement isn't. They didn't threaten directly, just mentioned his elderly mother, his sister's teaching job, his nephew's university application, all the things that could become difficult if Sato continued talking. He understood. The war had ended, the silence hadn't. He never gave another interview, but the story survived. Passed quietly among labor unions and leftist groups. Photocopied. Whispered. A fragment of truth circulating underground. In 1958, an American journalist named Robert Mitchell started researching submarine warfare in the Pacific. Found Commander Enright's patrol reports. Read about sinking a 71,000-ton carrier. He tracked down Enright, retired in California. Can you tell me about the Shinano? Enright poured coffee. Sat on his porch, overlooking the ocean. I can tell you I sank her. 6 torpedoes, 17 hours to go down. Largest warship ever sunk by submarine. Japanese records say she was on her maiden voyage, barely operational. I didn't know that then, just saw a target. Does it change anything, knowing she was unfinished? Enright stared at the horizon. I used to think I'd won something that night, proved I wasn't a coward, redeemed myself. He paused. Then I learned the truth. That ship was a coffin before I ever fired. The men who died were sent to sea in something that couldn't protect them. He looked at Mitchell. I don't know what to call that. Victory, mercy, murder, shortcut. Mitchell published the article in 1959. It caused minor waves. Military historians took note. But most Americans didn't care about a Japanese carrier sunk 15 years ago. The war was over. Move on. In Japan, the article was translated and circulated among survivors. They read Enright's words that ship was a coffin before I ever fired, and felt something shift. An American commander had spoken their truth. An enemy had validated what they'd been forbidden to say. Nakamura read the article in his small apartment. He was working as a warehouse clerk now, drinking less but smoking more. The article lay on his table for 3 days before he picked up a pen. He wrote to Mitchell, told his story, sent it with no expectation of reply. Mitchell wrote back 6 months later. Your letter is remarkable. Would you be willing to be interviewed on record? Nakamura thought about his family, his wife's health, his son's career, all the reasons to stay silent. Then he thought about Abe standing on the bridge as the ship went down, about young cadets who'd never see 20, about Takeda trying to warn anyone who'd listen. He wrote back, yes. The interview took place in Tokyo, March 1960. Mitchell brought a tape recorder. Nakamura talked for 12 hours over 3 days, told everything. At the end, Mitchell asked, why now? Why speak after 15 years? Because I'm dying. Nakamura lit another cigarette. Lung cancer. 6 months, maybe a year. They can't threaten my career anymore. Can't take my pension. Can't hurt my family. They're grown independent. I'm finally free to tell the truth. You waited until it cost you nothing. I waited until I had nothing left to lose. That's not the same thing. Nakamura's eyes watered. Not emotion, just smoke. The brave ones spoke in 1945 and were destroyed. I'm not brave. I'm just terminal. Mitchell's article appeared in 1961. The ship that shouldn't have sailed inside Japan's greatest naval disaster. It included Nakamura's testimony, Takeda's warnings from Sato's interview, survivors' accounts compiled from underground sources. It was picked up by major newspapers, translated back into Japanese. Finally, after 16 years, the Shinano's story entered public consciousness. The response was fury, not at the survivors, but at the system. Letters poured into newspapers demanding accountability. Who authorized the launch? Who enforced the silence? Who punished the men who tried to speak? The Japanese government formed a commission, held hearings, called witnesses. Nakamura testified in September 1961, dying now, oxygen tank beside him, voice weak but words strong. The Shinano didn't sink because of American torpedoes. She sank because pride matters more than people in our culture, because admitting unreadiness was seen as weakness, because 200 to 500 lives were worth less than avoiding embarrassment. He died 3 weeks later. His testimony was entered into the official record. His real report, the one they'd forced him to retract in 1944, was finally declassified and published. Captain Abe was posthumously exonerated. Records showed he'd requested delay and been overruled. He'd followed orders. The failure was systemic, not individual. But exoneration didn't bring him back, didn't give closure to his widow, didn't undo 17 years of her thinking her husband had been reckless. In 1963, the commission released its findings. The Shinano disaster was caused by command negligence, inadequate construction oversight, and systemic culture that punished truth-telling. 17 officials received reprimands. None faced criminal charges. The survivors who'd been threatened into silence received official apologies. And nothing else. No compensation for lost careers. No acknowledgement of the trauma of forced silence. Just paper apologies signed by bureaucrats. Yasuda read his apology sitting in his fishing boat, laughed until he cried, then used it to wrap his lunch. But something had shifted. The survivors could finally gather openly. In 1964, they held the first official Shinano memorial service. 53 survivors attended, average age 48. They looked 70. They shared stories, not the sanitized version, the real one. Water rising, men drowning, officers lying, systems failing. Cadet Tanaka, now a middle-aged teacher, spoke about the farm boy he'd been. How he'd believed the propaganda. How November 29, 1944 had taught him that institutions lie and faith kills. I spent 20 years thinking I was crazy, he said, thinking my memories were wrong, because everyone said the Shinano had fought gloriously, but I remembered terror, chaos, water in my mouth, and I thought maybe I'm defective, maybe I'm the problem. He looked around at the other survivors. But I wasn't. We weren't. The system was, and they made us think we were broken for remembering the truth. In 1970, Takeda died. His son Kenzo, now 52, found the metal box buried in the garden, inside 300 pages of testimony, the steel sample from batch 447, and a note to whoever reads this, I tried to stop it. Nobody would listen. Not because my evidence was weak, but because truth is always weak against power's need to believe its own stories. Learn from this. When engineers warn and administrators override, people die. Every time. No exceptions. Kenzo donated everything to the newly established National Maritime Museum. The exhibit opened in 1972, The Shinano Lessons in Steel and Silence. It included Takeda's manuscript, Nakamura's testimony, photographs of survivors, the actual steel sample from batch 447 analyzed and confirmed to be substandard, and in the center a list of 1,435 names. Every person who died November 29, 1944. Not statistics, not casualties, names, ages, hometowns, the youngest 15, a galley worker who'd lied about his age to support his family, the oldest 63, Takeda's colleague, a master welder who'd refused to abandon the ship during construction. The exhibit drew massive crowds. School children on field trips, veterans in wheelchairs, families searching for names they'd been told to forget. In 1975, Commander Enright visited Japan for the first time since the war. He was 73, came to see the exhibit, to understand what he'd actually sunk. Kenzo met him there. They stood before the wall of names. My father helped build this ship, Kenzo said. He knew she wasn't ready, tried to stop it. I fired the torpedoes, Enright replied. Thought I was winning the war. Were you Enright looked at the names. At the 15-year-old galley worker, at the 63-year-old welder. I don't know anymore. I killed a ship that was already dying. I'm not sure what that makes me. They stood in silence. Killer and builder's son, enemy and survivor. Two old men trying to find meaning in old steel and old choices. Finally, Kenzo said, My father wrote that truth is always weak against power's need to believe its own stories. You and I were just proof of that. You believed you were hunting evil. They believed they were building invincibility. Both sides believed so hard they couldn't see what was real. What was real? That steel has limits, that men make mistakes, that rushing creation guarantees destruction. Kenzo touched the glass case holding his father's steel sample. That you can't sink the truth forever. Eventually it surfaces. But by the time it surfaced, so many were gone. Nakamura dead before vindication. Abe drowned without knowing he'd be exonerated. Takeda buried without seeing his warnings acknowledged. Hundreds of survivors who'd lived with forced silence until silence became their graves. The living survivors gathered annually. Their numbers dwindled. 1980, 37. 1990, 19. 2007. In 2002, marine archaeologists located the Shinano's wreck, 4,300 feet down. Using submersibles, they photographed the hull, found the torpedo damage, found evidence of flooding through unsealed compartments, found in preserved sections the exact steel composition Takeda had documented. His warnings 58 years late were confirmed accurate. The last living survivor, Yoshida the sailor who'd frozen at the watertight door, was 86. Journalist asked for his reaction to the wreck discovery. Does it matter, he said. Finding the ship doesn't bring back the men. Proving Takeda was right doesn't make the system listen better next time. It's just archaeology. The real wreck is up here. He tapped his head. The memories, the silence we carried, the knowledge that speaking truth costs everything. He died in 2009, age 93, last survivor of the Shinano. At his funeral, his daughter read from his private journals, writings he'd never shown anyone. November 29, 1944, I heard them drowning and did nothing. July 1945, told to forget, threatened into silence, learned survival means amnesia. December 1960. Nakamura spoke, I stayed quiet, still too afraid. August 2002, they found the ship. Proved everything we remembered was true, but half of us are dead. We carried the truth to our graves so the living wouldn't have to carry the burden. Was that courage or cowardice? I still don't know. His daughter closed the journal. My father spent 64 years asking if he was brave or broken. The answer is he was human, and humans don't survive truth. They just survive. The gate to the Shinano's story had finally broken open. The silence had ended. The truth was free. But freedom came too late for the men who'd drowned in November. Too late for the survivors who'd died before vindication. Too late for the families who'd believed official lies their entire lives. Too late for the system to learn before sending other ships, other men, into other disasters born of pride and deadline pressure. Liberation arrived, but the cells were already empty. The prisoners were ghosts. And the living, the ones who'd waited decades to speak, were too old, too tired, too haunted to feel anything but relief that the burden could finally be set down. The Shinano's truth was free. But freedom is always too late for those who drown in silence, waiting for someone to listen. But that burden, once set down, didn't disappear. It transformed. In 2010, a year after Yoshida's funeral, his daughter Keiko stood in the National Maritime Museum holding her father's journals. The curator had asked to include them in the permanent Shinano exhibit. He never wanted anyone to read these, she said. I know. The curator, a woman named Hiroko Matsumoto, was 63. Her grandfather had been one of the civilian workers who'd drowned. But he also kept them. For 64 years. That means something. Keiko opened to a random page, her father's handwriting shaky in his final years. The truth doesn't set you free, it just makes you responsible. For remembering. For telling. For not letting it happen again. She closed the journal. What if I don't want that responsibility? Matsumoto looked at her steadily. Then 435 people died for nothing. They drowned in silence, and we'll let them stay drowned. She paused. Your father carried this alone his whole life. You can share the weight with thousands. That's the difference memory makes. Keiko donated the journals. They went on display in November 2010, 66 years after the sinking. Beside them, a photograph of young Yoshida in 1944, 19 years old, smiling in a new uniform. And beside that, his final journal entry written 3 days before he died. I am 86. I have lived 64 years longer than the men I heard drowning. That is not survival. That is witnessing. My life was not mine, it belonged to their memory. Now I pass that ownership to whoever reads this. The dead need the living to remember them. Not to worship, not to mythologize, just to remember honestly. That's the only immortality any of us get. The exhibit attracted a visitor that year who nobody expected. Lieutenant Commander Harold Jameson's grandson, Mark Jameson, 52 years old, professor of military history at Georgetown University. He'd found his grandfather's classified files while settling the estate. He contacted the museum. My grandfather interviewed Nakamura in 1945, classified the testimony. I have the original transcripts. I think they belong here. Matsumoto met him in her office. He brought a leather case containing yellowed documents. Nakamura's 6-hour testimony. Unredacted. The version that had been buried for 65 years. Why now? She asked. Because I spent my career studying how institutions protect themselves, how they bury truth, how they classify inconvenient memories. He opened the case. My grandfather followed orders, buried this testimony because he was told it would destabilize Japan. He died thinking he'd done the right thing, but I read his private letters. He regretted it every day. Couldn't sleep. Drank too much. Carried the weight of silencing a man who just watched 435 people die. So you're doing what he couldn't. I'm doing what he should have. Jameson placed the documents on her desk. Truth doesn't have an expiration date. It just waits until someone's brave enough or guilty enough to release it. The documents went into the exhibit in 2011. Nakamura's full testimony finally public. Visitors could read his descriptions of flooding compartments, failed pumps, the decision to maintain 20 knots. Could read his original report, the honest one that had been retracted under threat. And at the end, they could read the interview with Jameson. Commander, why are you speaking now? Because I'm dying, and the dead finally outweigh the living. I spent 16 years protecting my family, my pension, my career. Now I have 6 months, and I realize my silence killed those men a second time. They drowned in November. I drowned them again by pretending it didn't matter. The museum added one more element to the exhibit in 2012. A simple wooden box. Inside a piece of steel. labeled Batch 447, Recycled Steel Substandard, installed compartment C-47, August 1942, documented by Master Riveter Saburo Takeda. Warnings ignored. Ship sank November 29, 1944. The steel was small, maybe 4 inches square. Looked ordinary. But metallurgical analysis showed exactly what Takeda had documented: too much slag, insufficient carbon content, brittleness under stress. The kind of steel that sings when you tap it wrong. The kind that fails when you need it most. Matsumoto stood before the display thinking about her grandfather. She'd never known him. He'd drowned when her mother was 6 months old. Her grandmother had remarried, moved on, tried to forget. But her mother had given her his name, Kenji. The same name as Tanaka Kenji, the welder who'd survived. "Did you ever meet him, Mom?" a visitor asked. American, young, probably military, the haircut gave it away. "My grandfather, no. He died before I was born." "What did he do on the ship?" "He welded. He installed substandard steel because he was ordered to, and he survived to spend 60 years wishing he'd refused." The young man stared at the steel sample. "I'm Navy, submariner. We study the Shinano in training. How Archerfish sank the biggest carrier ever built." He paused. "They don't tell us it was already sinking." "They wouldn't. Victory stories don't include asterisks." "Is that what this is?" He gestured at the exhibit. "The asterisk," Matsumoto smiled sadly. "This is what happens when the asterisk finally gets printed. 70 years too late to matter, but just in time to teach." In 2014, the museum hosted a symposium, Institutional Silence and Historical Memory. Scholars from 6 countries, survivors' families, naval historians, and one surprise guest, Captain Robert Mueller, commander of USS Michigan, a nuclear submarine. He'd requested to speak. Matsumoto approved without knowing why. Mueller stood at the podium before 200 people. "I command the most powerful submarine in the world, 800 feet long, 18,000 tons, 24 ballistic missiles. I can destroy entire cities without surfacing." He paused. "But I came here because I needed to understand what happens when power stops listening to truth." He told a story. 2 years earlier, his chief engineer had flagged a problem with reactor coolant systems. Minor, probably, but worth investigating. Mueller had been on a tight schedule. Behind on qualifications. Under pressure from Squadron Command. He'd overruled the engineer. Maintained schedule. 3 weeks later, the problem worsened. They'd had to emergency surface. Spent 6 months in repair. The Admiral had been furious. Mueller's career had stalled. "I was angry," he said. "Blame my engineer for not being clearer. Blame my crew for not catching it earlier. Blamed everyone except the person responsible." He looked at the Shinano exhibit behind him. "Then I read about Takeda, about how he'd flagged substandard steel and been overruled, about how he'd watched the ship sink and known it was his rivets failing. I realized I was Foreman Matsui. I was the officer on the bridge. I was every person who chose schedule over safety." "What changed?" someone asked. "I stopped talking. Started listening. When my people raise concerns, now I don't explain them away. I investigate. Even if it costs time. Even if it makes me look weak. Because the Shinano taught me something we don't like to admit." He gestured at the names on the wall. "Pride kills. Certainty kills. The belief that we can't possibly be wrong, that kills more efficiently than any weapon." After the symposium, an elderly woman approached Matsumoto, 87 years old. Used a walker, but her eyes were sharp. "I'm Abe Sachiko, Captain Abe's daughter." Matsumoto's breath caught. "I didn't know he had children." "I was 3 when he died. Don't remember him." Sachiko looked at her father's photograph in the exhibit Captain Abe on the bridge 1944, weeks before the Shinano launched. "My mother never spoke about him, not once. When I asked, she'd say, 'Your father died with honor,' nothing more." "Did you believe her?" "I believed he was a coward, that he'd sailed an unready ship and gotten 1,435 people killed. That's what everyone said, what the newspapers implied, what the Navy's official reports suggested." She touched her father's photograph. "I spent 70 years ashamed of him. And now I've read Nakamura's testimony, read the commission findings, learned my father requested delay and was overruled, that he followed orders, that he died trying to save his crew." Her voice cracked. "I spent 70 years hating a man who was just trying to do his duty in a system that punished honesty." Matsumoto took her hand. He would have understood. That's what the system does, makes us hate the wrong people, makes us blame individuals for institutional failures. "I'm 97 years old. I don't have time left to forgive properly." "Then don't forgive. Just remember honestly, that's all any of us can do. Sachiko came back every month until she died in 2017, sat before her father's photograph, talked to him, told him about her life, her children, her career as a teacher, told him she understood now, told him she was sorry for believing the lies. When she died, her will specified, "Cremate me, scatter my ashes over the Shinano wreck site, let me be with my father finally." Her children honored it, chartered a boat, sailed to the coordinates, released her ashes into the Pacific above the sunken carrier. One of her grandsons, a marine biologist, said later, "We stood on that boat and I thought 4,000 feet below us is my great-grandfather, a man I never knew, who died trying to do his job. And for 70 years, my grandmother thought he was a failure. That's what silence does. It doesn't just bury the dead, it poisons the living." The exhibit evolved. In 2018, they added an interactive element. Visitors could record their own reflections. What the Shinano story meant to them. What lessons they took away. A nuclear engineer. I work in an industry where mistakes kill thousands. This taught me that speaking up isn't insubordination, it's duty. A nurse. My hospital punishes people who report safety concerns. I stayed quiet for 3 years. After seeing this, I filed my first incident report, got reprimanded. But I'll keep reporting, because silence is participation. A teenager, my history teacher brought us here, said this is what happens when nobody says no. When everyone just follows orders. I don't know what I'll do with that, but I won't forget it. In 2020, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the museum closed. But Matsumoto moved the exhibit online. Virtual tours, digitized documents, recordings of survivors' testimonies. One video went viral, Nakamura's grandson reading his grandfather's final interview. The part where he said, "I waited until I had nothing left to lose." That's not bravery, but maybe sharing what I learned makes it worth something. 3 million views, comments from around the world. A doctor in Italy. "We're watching patients die because we don't have equipment. Administration says to make do. I showed my director this video, told him I won't be Nakamura. I won't wait until I'm dying to tell the truth." A pilot in Brazil. My airline pressures us to fly on tight maintenance schedules. After watching this, 5 of us filed safety complaints. They threatened us. We filed anyway, because we saw what silence costs. A soldier in Australia, command, ordered us into a situation we weren't trained for. I thought about Abe following orders that killed his crew. I refused, got court-martialed, but my team lived. Worth it. The Shinano had become more than history. It had become parable, warning, mirror. Every viewer saw their own silence reflected, their own moments of choosing comfort over truth. In 2023, the museum commissioned a memorial sculpture to be installed at Yokosuka, where the ship had been built. The design was simple, a steel gate, partially open, and through the opening, 1,435 names etched in glass. The artist explained, "Gates are about control, about who gets through, who gets heard. This gate is frozen in the act of opening, because truth is always in the process of breaking through, never fully free, never fully contained, just eternally emerging." The dedication ceremony was November 29th, 2023, 79 years to the day after the sinking. No survivors left to attend, but their children came. Their grandchildren. Their great-grandchildren. Keiko Yoshida's daughter spoke, "My father spent his life asking if he was brave or broken. I think he was teaching us there's no difference. Broken people are the brave ones, because they know what it costs to stand when the system wants you kneeling." Mark Jameson, grandson of the intelligence officer, spoke, "My grandfather silenced Nakamura and regretted it until death. I released those files and felt relief. But relief isn't redemption. Nothing redeems institutional silence. We just choose not to repeat it. That's the only honor available." Matsumoto spoke last. "My grandfather welded the compartments that flooded, used the steel he was given, followed the orders he received, and survived to tell his grandchildren question authority, because authority questions nothing but its own power." She gestured at the gate. "This memorial isn't about the Shinano. It's about every time someone saw danger and stayed silent. Every time someone valued career over conscience. Every time someone drowned in policy." She paused, looked at the crowd, saw faces from 30 countries, saw military uniforms and civilian clothes, saw young and old, all carrying their own silences. The men who died here didn't die for Japan. They died for expedience, for deadline pressure, for institutional pride, and if we only remember them as victims, we waste their death. Her voice strengthened. But if we remember them, as warning if we hear their silence screaming across 79 years, then maybe 1-436 deaths purchase something. Not redemption, not meaning, just attention. Just the willingness to ask, am I building a ship that can't float? Am I welding compartments with substandard steel? Am I following orders that lead to drowning? She walked to the gate, touched one of the names etched in glass. These men want nothing from us. They're past wanting. But their memory demands something that we recognize ourselves in their story, that we see our own silence in their drowning, that we understand institutional failure isn't abstract, it's personal. It's 1-436 people who trusted the system to value their lives more than its pride. The gate stood in Yokosuka now. Visitors came daily, touched the names, took photographs, but mostly they stood silent, processing what it meant, a memory etched in steel and glass, a warning frozen in the act of opening, a truth that took 79 years to speak and will take generations to absorb. Because the Shinano's lesson isn't complicated. It's just unbearable we drown our people in policy. We sink them in procedure. We torpedo them with the need to save face. And then we classify the bodies and call it stability. But memory is resistance. Memory is refusal. Memory is the gate that won't fully close the truth that won't stay buried, the names that insist on being spoken. The Shinano was built with pride and sank in shame. But it's remembered with honesty. And honesty, raw, uncomfortable, institutional challenging honesty, is the only thing that keeps the dead from dying twice. In the visitor book at the gate's base, the final entry from 2024 read, "I came here from a nuclear plant where we're behind schedule. Pressure to cut corners. After seeing this, I filed my first safety complaint. They'll probably fire me, but I saw what happens when nobody speaks. I saw 1-436 names. I won't add more." That's what the gate does. That's what memory does. Not change the past, not redeem the dead, just make the living uncomfortable enough to refuse silence. To choose the gate opening and over the gate closed. To recognize that every time we stay quiet about danger, we're welding compartments with substandard steel. And somewhere 4,000 feet down in the Pacific, the Shinano rests with her 1-435 souls, no longer a secret, no longer a shame, no longer a classified regret. Just a lesson. Expensive. Permanent. Waiting for the next person who thinks institutional loyalty matters more than institutional honesty. The gate stands open. The names glow in sunlight. The question remains, will you walk through, or will you close it behind you and pretend you never saw? If you believe their names deserve to be remembered, if you think their silence should finally speak, share this story. Write a name in the comments. Anyone who spoke truth and wasn't heard. Anyone who warned and was ignored. Anyone who drowned because power valued pride over preparation. Let this be the gate that stays open. Let their memory be the warning we finally hear. Because the Shinano didn't have to sink. And the next disaster, whatever form it takes, doesn't have to happen either. We just have to listen before we drown. Retry.